So, we are here today because while we recognize that access to justice is central to making human rights a reality for everyone, migrant workers continue to face major barriers in seeking justice when something goes wrong. And here, when we talk about justice, we must remember that it encompasses more than legal justice, and we recognize that remedy can come in many forms, including acknowledging harm and apologies, to restitution, financial compensation, and of course, holding perpetrators accountable. So why is this a challenge? Access to justice is already difficult in general, but for migrant workers, the transboundary nature of this makes it nearly unattainable, especially when they have returned to their hometowns and away from the jurisdiction of where the employer is located. Over the past few days, we have highlighted how migrant workers are one of the most vulnerable groups, and I know we've also had dedicated sessions on this, highlighting persistent challenges they face in accessing justice. And of course, this difficulty stems from complexity of navigating different legal systems, a lack of awareness regarding their rights and available support mechanisms, and of course, the considerable resources required, be it time, money, or effort to pursue justice across borders. And so in this complicated context, we must ask ourselves, how can we create a more enabling ecosystem in which people are encouraged to take innovative approaches, even if it means failing quickly and course correcting? And I know this is quite difficult to do in most of our setup. So the question we would like to pose today is, can technology help and provide a solution? And if so, how can we then leverage the new technologies to enhance access to justice for migrant workers across borders? And again, we have heard from various sessions in the last 2 days on how digital technology has been utilized to raise worker awareness of their rights or to facilitate access to grievance mechanisms. However, I think the question still remains, how can these solutions then be scaled to improve access to justice across border for all migrant workers? There's still much to learn how we can leverage. And of course, we talk about AI. That's a big area I think we need to really learn more. And we really need to see how this can then be leveraged to access grievance and remedy. And with all this, at the same time, with the emergence of new technologies, there are also new risks and potential unintended consequences that are not always predictable. So what risks should we be aware of in this midst of race towards technological advances? So with that in mind, we will be having 2 rounds of questions. In between these 2 questions, we would like to actually invite the audience to have some questions and reflections, as we really would like to make this a little bit more interactive. And I know the setup is not the most perfect setup to have an interactive panel discussions, but we can try. So please do think of some of the questions you have whilst the panelists are presenting. So at this point, let me introduce you, of course, to the esteemed panelists we have today. We have a very exciting lineup. Jibril, to my right, is the Jibril Faal. He's the co-founder and director of GK Partners, specializing in socially responsible business models, sustainable development, and program implementation. He's the first visiting professor in practice at the Institute of Global Affairs, London School of Economics, vice chair of Bond, UK, and council member of Carnegie African Diaspora Program, New York. He is a former magistrate, former chairman of Afford UK, and the founding director of ADEPT, Brussels. Of course, he has worked as a technical expert with the UN, World Bank, University of Oxford, governments, institutions across the world, you name it. And I think earlier he mentioned that he may have attended these hundreds of panel discussions such as this one. And he also served as a GFMD Civil Society co-chair, a Grand Rapporteur in 2017, and of course, overarching expert for the Global Compact for Migration. So very much an expert in this topic. And he has also addressed the UN General Assembly several times and appointed to various boards by the UK government. And in 2014, he was appointed OBE, Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. I had to Google what that was. Yes, it's a very long name, in the Queen's Birthday Honors List for services to international development. And I really would like to welcome him, as he had really flown from West Africa to join us today in Bangkok. To my left, we have Celso J. Hernandez Jr. He is the current director of the Management Information and Technology Service of the Department of Migrant Workers in the Philippines. Prior to this, within the DMW, he was the regional director of the Regional Office for the National Capital Region, after being the director for the Licensing and Regulations Bureau. He was also previously the director of the Labor Market Development Branch, and for those who are familiar with the Philippines, the former DMW, which is the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration. Just to say that he has been working on the Overseas Employment Program for over 16 years now, starting as a legal officer. But then, of course, he has been really working with different divisions and offices and been exposed in industry regulation, adjudication, and, of course, welfare assistance. To my right over here, we have Rebecca Napier-Moore. She works at the ILO within the Triangle in ASEAN and Migrant Advocacy for Rights projects, covering work in Thailand, including the Migration Resource Centers, services, MRC services, trade union organizing, fair recruitment, and policy change. She has worked in Southeast Asia for 16 years on women's rights issues and migration issues. She was previously at the Global Alliance Against Trafficking Women, then chief editor of the academic journal Anti-Trafficking Review. And last but not least, William Goy. He's the current regional coordinator of Migrant Forum in Asia. Over the last 20 years, he has been at the forefront of international advocacy efforts, engaging and influencing international and multilateral processes to promote rights-based migration and development policies. And I'm sure many of you have also seen him in previous forums and platforms. He was a co-chair of the Global Forum on Migration Development Civil Society Days in 2011, and is also a member of the Executive Committee of the Asia People's Movement on Depth and Development, and in the Steering Committee of Metropolis Asia, a group of migration and development experts. So I think that's a very good coverage of the panels that we have today. And without further ado, let's start the discussion. To set the scene, I would like to first invite Rebecca to share some insights on what do international labor standards say on access to justice, and is there any international guidance on digitization, since we're here to talk about technology, as this is quite a new space where everything is ever evolving. Over to you.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here with you. The ILO at global level is launching a study in October on access to labor justice for migrant workers through cross-border litigation. I'll be speaking to some of that study here today, as well as some other work we've done on workers' data protection and safety in digital tools. I first want to establish first principles. One, that remediation shouldn't be necessary in the first place. And I want to remind us of that because much of the forum, given the topic, has felt like there's been an assumption or acceptance that there will be bad practice and we need to focus only on response. And want to emphasize within that strong and healthy worker and employer organizations, worker organizations that include migrant workers, should engage in social dialogue to solve problems as they emerge and before exploitation and need for remedy happens. The second thing I want to note is that a migrant worker who has faced violations of their rights should be able to obtain remedy by accessing justice mechanisms in the country of employment prior to returning to the country of origin. This is spelled out in General Principle 13 of the ILO General Principles and Operational Guidelines for Fair Recruitment, and in recommendation number 151, noting that a migrant worker should be allowed sufficient time in the country of employment to obtain a final decision, be reinstated, receive compensation, and allowed to find alternate employment. I don't know about you, but from a general knowledge of the region, there are very few countries where that happens in practice on a widespread basis. Now, given that those are not reality, not widespread, all of us are here today on this panel and in this room looking for two things: cross-border justice with technology. So what do international labor standards and guidelines say on those? Beyond the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the ICCPR, CERD, CEDAW, with rights on access to justice generally, Migrant Worker Recommendation 151 says that there should be equal treatment of with nationals, as regards legal assistance and remuneration for any outstanding compensation owed, even after the person has left the country of employment, and regardless of immigration status that they had in that country of employment. Related to digitization, I'm afraid I'm a bit of a naysayer on the panel, reminding us all to put guardrails on all of the exciting tech solutions that we are coming up with, so that we remember and protect the migrant workers who this tech is for. And we ensure that we avoid capture by actors wanting to thwart fair access to justice. In 2021, so a couple years back, a colleague of mine and I did research for the Abu Dhabi Dialogue and sent a survey to government respondents in region, partly on data privacy protections related to migration governance technologies. While most states thought that their data privacy laws were adequate to protect nationals and migrant workers alike from, for instance, financial or identity theft, or selling on of a worker's data, others said that their laws were not adequate. So a few places to mention within ILS. C181 includes privacy measures in recruitment specifically, as do other international law more generally on data privacy. And given migration platforms are cross-border, there may be complications about which countries' data privacy laws apply, or the different countries' provisions may be uneven. So, best recommendation is to please apply the highest level of legal protection and settle these issues before platform development. ILO has a code of practice on protection of workers' personal data, so please do look that up, which includes, among others, that workers may not waive their rights to privacy and that technology shouldn't be used to control workers. And confidentiality is another key point there. I want to just end with a quick note just to remind us as we start talking about technology again, that we need to ensure that the technology is built in a way that does protect and serve migrant workers. We've seen technology being built recently or use of technology promoted, but then subverted. So for instance, we've seen a mandatory ATM deposits or blockchain where salary is deposited into a bank account so that there is a digital or evidentiary trail for access to justice. However, in some cases, ATM cards are confiscated and money is taken out of a worker's ATM, even though the paper trail looks great. Someone else has taken their money. On the other hand, we've seen, and I'll note in the next question round with a little bit more positivity, where both employers and workers are glad to have the transparency in digital paper trails. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you setting the scene and highlighting some of the key principles when we're talking about this, but at the same time, highlighting the importance of really following the highest level when it comes to data protection and privacy. And I think it's okay, you have a bit of the guardrails in it as well. And an interesting anecdote how even on paper it may look perfect, but the reality may be different on the ground. So with that, I would actually like to hand over to Jibril, who, of course, given your rich experience working in migrant workers empowerment using technology as well, how do you see technology play a role in advancing access to justice for migrant workers? And in particular, we'll be really interested in learning a practical example such as the online dispute resolution and how feasible and practicable they are to address migrant labor disputes. And perhaps not everyone in the room is familiar with that term, so it'd be really great if you can elaborate a little bit on that as well. Over.
Thank you very much, Yuko, and good morning, colleagues and friends. There are three parts to the discussion today: digital technology, access to justice, and across borders. Although it is early in the morning, I'm still asking you to trust me that on the first one, digital technology, that enough exists for us to achieve what we want. That's what I want you to trust me on. The second one, access to justice, is a mess everywhere. The most vulnerable have difficulty accessing justice and are subject to injustice. So your technology by itself will not eliminate that. So that block of problem need to be treated. Only that technology is a means to assist. And then the last part, that is across borders, that also is a difficult and emerging one. Because even if you have the technological solution and you have countries and parties that are aiming to ease the access to justice, the jurisdictional issue of cross boundaries still becomes an issue. We argue that, again, technology can help you for it. So the first bit on the digital technology, does it exist? Not only that it exists, it is already in use to different degrees. And COVID was the deciding period when people didn't have an option. So it had to be used. So some of the development that the tech companies have been working on for years, for generations, came into life when everything had to be put on digital platforms. And if you take even in Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, which perhaps is the lead in this area, the use of digital technology or online dispute resolution is so elaborate and so successful, but not in labor migration disputes. So if you take commercial disputes, it's amongst the best in the world, where anything from the submission of bundles, the notifications using AI to make sure things work easy, translation, legal representatives checking their credentials, all of that is in place and working. So we say that it's an advocacy issue to use the power of that technology and apply it to this area that is a labor migration dispute. That's not a technology question, that's an advocacy question. So we say to you, continue to work with the governments to say it exists, you're using it in other disciplines, make it work for labor migrant. Some places, they already use online dispute resolution at an administrative level of dispute resolution through their tribunals, and it is working. But when you speak with the people who work in it to support the migrant laborers, they say still we are not seeing the high volume going through it. The high volume is not happening. That again is not a technology. It's not that the technology can't handle it. It's because the state parties and others don't want to. So the work is there. Now, across boundaries, in some countries, there are genuine queries in that, as you know, countries and nation state are most jealous of their sovereignty, and that is best expressed in politics and in the application of the law. So there's a jurisdictional issue. If you are not in the jurisdiction, how do you deal with it? So this is not a straight answer that the technology allows it. That means that member states should then just apply it. They, in some cases, they need to adjust their laws to allow for, say, a litigant or a complainant who is not physically in the jurisdiction for the law to recognize that they can still come in and give evidence. Now, the technology allows you to satisfy all of the worries that the judicial system would have had in place. For example, the person I'm hearing or the person I'm seeing, is it really that person? The technology can confirm through ID systems that it's a person. In which case, where they are they at a different city or are they in a different country, become a very limited point that can be overcome. Just as we see it in COVID time, prior to, in many legal cases, you physically have to turn up. But we saw during the e-trials that developed during COVID that it is accepted now that you don't need to turn up. I served as a magistrate for 16 years in the United Kingdom. We had an element of e-courts, mainly for bail trials. If a defendant is in prison, they don't need to physically turn up to the court. And I'll tell you the reason. It's more prosaic than one may think. Simply because if they leave the prison, they leave their cell, they lose their cell. They're processed, and when they go back, they may end up in a different cell. And these prisoners love their cell so well, they don't want to leave, so they want to keep that cell. So we would do a trial, those trials on CCTV system. So this system exists, the advocacy need to be advanced. And on the point of how secure and how user-friendly can it be, we argue, and I refer to the 3 different studies we've done for the Abu Dhabi dialogue, which maybe we'll be able to share the links, whereby we've given evidence after evidence of how these things exist and can be used. Now, the labor migrants who may be vulnerable, I argue that they may be vulnerable, but they are not without agency. Some of these people may not know, as we would hear, how to use sophisticated platforms, but they know how to use the social media and other technology. And with these online dispute resolution techniques, you can always easily put a functionality here. For example, things to go to WhatsApp or to go to other applications that the people are familiar with. And the language and translation skills are also easier to access. And as I said, in the UAE area, there's sophisticated software being used on the languages to check the authenticity of the languages. The final point I'll make on this, which is still a problem to be overcome, is around representation. In most legal cases, as a litigant, I cannot come and necessarily represent myself. I need a lawyer. So the rules in some countries are that the lawyers who are registered and recognized, in some countries, especially in the Gulf, you have to be a citizen in there. You cannot represent lawyers in a different jurisdiction having an access to that. So that bit on how do you get the lawyers in the country of litigation to work with lawyers in the country of origin where some of these workers have returned to, that area also needs to be developed. And in the last Abu Dhabi Dialogue Forum in February, we were pushing that one does not wait for everybody to agree to start, that it would make sense for a select number of countries and corridors to start trialing this and testing it. And if they think that's too onerous, they can also even pick up 1 or 2 topics. I'm sure William would be happy if one of the topics they picked up was wage theft. And there's a whole body of dispute already sitting there waiting. The technology allows, let's apply it and test it. And when, for example, William started his wage test campaign, I was warning a caution that legally theft means not only that I've taken something of value from you, but that I should have intention to keep it permanently from you. And if it's just happened, you may have a defense and say, well, I always meant to give it to you. But it's several years' time now, so it is clearly theft. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting that you also bring in examples from your time as a magistrate, but also to really say that technology already exists. And what's really important is to have that enabling environment to use that technology, but also make it work for migrant workers. And in particular, I really appreciate your point around they're vulnerable, but also they already do have agency. And again, of course, the importance of the representation. You've touched on the wage theft, and you also talked about pandemic, which is a great segue as well to the next speaker, Director Salso from the government of the Philippines. Of course, during the pandemic, many migrant workers came home with issues on non-payment of wages or wage theft, and it also put a spotlight on the struggle migrants face when seeking justice post-return. And again, I think the previous speakers already touched on the challenge that they have once, of course, you return to the countries of origin. And so in your experience, if you can please give an example of how the Philippines facilitated access to justice during that time, and what did the role of technology play in ensuring migrants have access to justice? But also we know that it comes with challenges as well. This was, it was unprecedented. So if you can also share some of the challenges you had. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Good morning to our colleagues and and other members of the panel. Well, as we all know, the pandemic really pushed us to innovate and really facilitated the acceptance of technology in addressing the issues of most of our migrant workers on the part of Philippines. During that time, the part of migrant workers is not yet constituted, it's not yet signed into a law. So during that time, uh, the those who are providing services are different agencies: the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, the then Philippine Overseas Labor Office, and the ILAB, and other offices. We established, as much as possible. There's no time for us to develop systems. There's no time for us to develop sophisticated and somehow more responsive systems. As much as possible, we wanted to address the issues of our workers. Most of the issues would be welfare. OWA and DOLE, Department of Labor and Employment, established a portal accessing for seeking those, giving opportunities for those who wanted to be repatriated, asking for financial assistance for those who were severely affected by the pandemic. And then the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, as well as POLO, established online this mediation and conciliation, wherein we do involve the foreign recruitment agencies of our workers, uh, the direct employers, the Philippine recruitment agencies that send these workers abroad. We do involve them in the dispute resolution of their cases, mostly. What are the cases with not payment of wages, abandonment, termination of contract, and then the inaction of their foreign recruitment agencies and their Philippine recruitment agencies, their call for their immediate repatriation during the COVID times. So all of those things, we also have this online legal assistance. Uh, we created this system using simple simple systems, access through social media, TikToks, Facebook, um, having portals, having using emails. It worked during the time. Somehow, what has been an issue there is that, as mentioned by Gabriel, there's always an issue. No, technologies. You're just using the technology as a tool, but somehow those who would be implementing it, those who would be into the system, should somehow uh, support it. No? For example, in the part of the receiving countries, it's always been a challenge for us. There's always been a challenge for us. Some foreign recruitment agencies, some employers, because of the peculiarity in our law on the joint and several liability, they will just simply refrain on helping our workers. They will just merely let the foreign recruitment agency and the government to address the issues of the workers. They would be telling that, in the event that I won't be paying you, there's a recruitment agency who deployed you who will be answerable for all your claims. But for us, uh, What we are seeking is that justice, access to justice, settling all of these issues must be made at the place of work site. It should not be an afterthought. Should not be. In most cases, I've been a legal officer for the past years. In most cases, workers will endure 2 years of this situation, non-payment, non-grant of day off, non-payment of overtime, and other abuses on workers, and they would just merely seek somehow recourse after they return to the country. And that's what we wanted to address. We wanted to address that this for these things before our workers return to the country. We wanted this to be solved. We wanted this to be resolved. We wanted all players, all stakeholders in the overseas employment program be responsible to stand up for their responsibility to our workers. The develop for us a system. We're developing several systems. We continue the system, but somehow, of course, there are a lot of challenges for us. There's a lot of gap for us. Most of our uh, most of our clients, the users of this technology, would have this so-called digital. There's a certain level of digital literacy. Most of them are domestic workers and those who belong to vulnerable skill set that would not have that access on the internet, would not have that somehow a capable cell phone or a laptop or a computer to be access uh, this systems that we are in place. So that's one gap for us. Infrastructure, of course, workers will be barred by their employers to access internet, to have their own phones on their own. So those things are also challenges for us. There's one thing that I'm see on the Philippine side, which is a big challenge. It's more of centering all of these technologies, all of the system to the needs of our workers. Uh, Workers in the use of digital technology would have a certain level of expectation. They wanted that they could have uh, all control with just a tip of their fingers. Somehow, that's a problem on our part. That's a problem on our part. Worker could access through an application, through a portal, um, legal advice. But if the complementary services of on our part, those who are supporting the technology, the tool, will not be on top of their services, that will be a big problem. If you wanted to seek legal advice and you'll be getting the legal advice 5 or 6 days after, if you wanted to seek repatriation and that, but the reply will be a week from now, that will be difficult. That will somehow destroy everything. No, the tools, the technological advances, the systems that we have was just a mere tool. But it's more of the system. It's more of the service providers. We need to strengthen the service providers. On our part, there's a lot of challenges: manpower, funding, even on my office servers. There are servers as early as 2010. We have servers. One day on last week, two servers crashed and carries a lot of important data on our part. Thank you for the cloud that we have that such storage, but somehow those challenges are existing in our office. Then somehow it's more for me. It's more on the dedication, delivering the service. It's more of using technology as a tool, but at the same time, the policy of the government to protect our workers. And likewise, of course, there's a challenges on the part of the receiving state, the destination country, and that their legal system would somehow, in a way, uh, somehow become hurdles on the pursuing justice on site. Sometimes one problem is the retaliation being for those who are those who are filing complaints, they will usually be subjected to retaliation. And this is not part of the protection that being given to our migrant workers. So most of our migrant workers, instead of availing services at the country destination, they will just prefer to return to the country and file cases in the Philippines, which sometimes the remedial and somehow the repatriation, uh, somehow wherein our solutions could be very limited. That could what we could provide to us. Somehow, I think if we could have technology, access to technology, we need to have this technology linked to access justice. We need to have our people to have greater access, not to the relevant informations. And those are the things that we should concentrate in terms of access to technology, linking it to access to, to justice. We need to help people. We need to let them, our workers, to trust the tool, to trust the system, to trust the services, and provide them access to relevant information about their problems, and ensure that they have access to justice. And also, uh, we need to somehow simplify things. Now, as much as possible, we need to have simple technology that could be very effective. No, we do not need any complicated. On the part of the Philippines, we do not need any complicated technology to assist them. Simple technology, simple but effective technology uh, for them to have access justice on site and even in the Philippines. That will be very important for us. That will be very important for us. There's a lot of challenges. I would not be a hypocrite to say that we do have a very ideal system. Yes, Philippines do have 50 years of uh, somehow overseas employment management, but somehow every now and then that the pandemic itself crashed all policies, all systems that we developed for the past more than 40 years. Because we never expected this. We never expected this. We never had any contingencies. We never think of these things on how we would help our workers in times of pandemic and any similar situations. And somehow, these are the challenges. These are the things that we have done during the pandemic.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's really interesting how the Philippines really have to step up and actually use technology in the midst of pandemic and try to actually provide us services that are needed. I mean, Philippines being the countries of origin have actually repatriated or received migrant workers, Filipino migrant workers, over a million of them as well. And so again, I think it really highlights the complexity of actually applying technology. It certainly talks about how the policies and capacities for the end users of these technology, but also the end users from the migrants' point of view, aren't always at the standard it needs to actually use the technology in a way that is most beneficial as well. And again, of course, you've highlighted many, many challenges, which I won't summarize. So thank you so much again for sharing your experience in the Philippines. And I would actually like to hand over to the next question to William. You've, of course, been actively engaging in campaigns and awareness raising activities on wage theft, and of course, empowering migrants to access to justice. What is your reflection and observation on existing barriers? Of course, we've heard some already from Celso, but really from the migrants' point of view, what have been the challenges and barriers to use technology to access justice across borders? Over to you.
Thanks, Yoko. And in preparation to this, when we had our preparatory call, the same question was put as to where is the campaign kind of thing and what success have we had? And I said the success has limited. And one of the response was maybe because you are not making enough noise or the noise is not loud enough. Yeah? And I think, and Jibril has pointed this out a little while ago, as MFA, we celebrate this year 30 years of the movement. But in the 30 years, I think it is safe to say that one of the biggest issues that we have had is wage theft. We only launched the campaign during the COVID only because our systems shut down. because of the number of cases, the number of migrants who came forward saying, this is what has happened. No wages, no end of service benefits, and things like that. So I think it is important for us today to register as well, because I hear also these days a lot of discussion based on the global compact of migration of regular pathways, regular pathways. And temporary labor migration programs are being seen, or seasonal worker programs are being seen as regular pathways. But let us agree on this. There is something very fundamentally wrong with this temporary labor migration program. 30 years of experience tells us that, and that is access to justice. And if work, we are not getting figures. I'm sure if we ask for figures, we will know. Like, for example, if we ask for from the Philippines, in terms of give us dollar figures, how many workers have come to you with complaints that they have not received the wages in any given year? And it will go in the millions. Am I right, sir? It will go in the millions. Can a country like Philippines, let's put a figure to it, 5 million or 7 million. Philippines in remittances gets what? How many? That's 10% of our. Can Philippines as a country say, no problem, this is 5 million is nothing, it's chicken compared to what we are getting in remittances, which is 50 billion or 50 billion kind of thing. I think we've got to start looking at this as this fundamental flaw, and we don't know the size of it. But the World Bank every year will give us how remittances is growing. So we can calculate, we know how to calculate remittances and how it is growing every year. We know how to calculate when there is a typhoon and how much is lost in that typhoon. Within a week, we get figures. But we don't have figures of how much is lost in wage theft or non-payment of end of service benefits. I don't understand that. And yet in GCM, objective one, get data, like as if data. And this data mantra, let's get off it, because if you don't know how to collect the data, we know. We know how to get that data, because migrants come to complain. The second point about the platforms, and Jibril has said, we are not talking about something new, for God's sake. This goes as old as the WTO. There are platforms where countries have been able to establish in commercial law and trade law, which allows this kind of digital tools to be used to say, oh, we don't like your products, we are sending them back. This is wrong with it. And then lawyers across borders get together and say, no, we had an agreement on this. So they are doing that all the time on trade. They are doing that all the time in commercial law. But when it comes to labor law, we say, oh, there are not enough platforms. Then we have to worry about privacy and all. Come on. The UN system, for God's sake, in the UN system itself, insurance claims, end of service benefits, this is all being done digitally now. So how is the data protected there? How is the platform secure there? But for migrants, then we have to worry. And I think this is something we have to really start taking into consideration. And I think Jibril is spot on. It is a point of political will. We have to have the political will, or the more we talk of regular pathways and the more we create temporary labor migration programs, let us be consciously aware that we are feeding more into a system that is fundamentally wrong in that it exploits workers. And workers' lives are impacted. This is something we have to be consciously aware every time we make a speech about regular pathways. The more we open up, because the system is designed in some ways that makes the worker, takes away agency, takes away the capacity to fight for rights, the freedom of association not given. Suddenly this worker who's desperate to earn that livelihood is okay then to go without wages for a year and continue to work in the hope of he or she will get it. So I think the technology is there, the platform is there, the political will and the attitude is not there. If that was there, things would have been possible. Let us also get off this mantra of literacy. The workers are not literate and they're not digitally literate. Get off this mantra as well. Okay. My 12-year-old is more digitally literate than I am, and she didn't learn it in school. She didn't learn it in school. I go in labor camps, workers' sites, when I go on the field, and I look at them and I say, wow, they live in a cyber world. They live in a cyber world. So how can it be that they will learn, and they will learn so fast, faster than any one of us, if they know that there is a system in place wherein they can make a complaint and they can get their dues? They will learn overnight. So let us not make that as an excuse that we should not put these systems in place because it will take time. Workers learn fast, maybe much faster than us in the room, because their level of desperation is different from ours. Their level of securing justice is different from ours. And that's why it's out there, and we have to make it happen. And we can try. And Jibril has given case. The infrastructure is already there in so many of the jurisdictions. We can test this. We can test this across corridors. It's already been tested. Now we have to scale it up. I know in the Philippines, at least, there are a number of cases that have already been done cross-border. What if resources were given to support the infrastructure development and to make an example out of it? We give resources to build Disneyland, but we don't give resources to build justice mechanisms. And I think this is something we have to really consciously be aware of. There are too many workers out there. And I would suggest we start putting out figures. We should start putting out figures. Don't put figures of only how much remittances is flowing. Put figures of how much is lost. Because when you understand what is lost for a worker, it's not only a worker's wage that is lost. It's his child's education, his wife's health, his parents' health, her housing. There's so much attached to just a 200 US dollar that is not given for 6 months. There's so much attached to that. And we have to understand that that is what we need to focus on. If we believe in rule of law, if we believe in people-centered approaches, then that is what we need to understand. And we have to find the political will to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all those thought-provoking points. And I'm very conscious of the time already. So maybe we were a little bit ambitious as to having 2 rounds of questions. And so at this point, I would already like to open the floor for questions, comments, reflections. I see a lot of hands opening up. And then perhaps at the end, when you also provide a response, perhaps we can actually focus on the forward-looking. What are then tangible actions that we should take as we move forward from here? Okay, so we'll start with the gentleman at the back. Oh, yeah. Yes. Sorry, I can't see very well.
Hi.
Sorry. One,
Yeah,
I can't really see the color, but the person with the slightly colorful shirts.
thank you. I just left. My name is Haryanto Swarno. I'm from Indonesia Migrant Worker Union in Indonesia. I think it's good discuss in morning. In the issue of migrant workers, we understand that the most follow technology development. Follow technology can be tool to spread information about safe migration. But lately money, technology, the advance have been used to tool to grab migrant. That's the example, the money migrant worker, the exploitation of technology, and the forced labor and human trafficking in the Southeast Asia. For example, lately money technologies have been used to save people online scam. Sadly, money workers from Indonesia have become victim being forced to commit online scam in Myanmar, in Cambodia, in Philippines, and the other country, the Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, many technology are used to carry out an official recruitment. And many Indonesia people consumed by false information from social media platform and digital order. ASEAN have one declaration from technology for human trafficking. One question for all the panelists. How can be implementation the ASEAN Declaration regarding technology-based human trafficking in ASEAN reduce technology-based crime? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then, of course, the gentleman in the front.
My name is Shahidur Rahman. I work at Brack University, Bangladesh as a faculty. I think one conversation is missing in our dialogue. That is actually when we look at inclusion of digital technology, we see actually the gender inequality in getting the access to digital technology. Yes, still into this world, we have about 2 billion people do not have the access to internet. But when we look at from the gender context, you will find actually a majority of the women. From my research experience, what I see that my research is actually on the garment workers in Bangladesh ready-made garment industry. So basically, in the past, for a long time, the workers they received their salary by cash, but after some time, and at that time also they didn't have the access to banking system. But later now we can see that in some factories, workers getting a salary by using the mobile phone, mobile financial service. But still, I think that if you look at the over the scale, actually, the use of technology such as mobile financial system, it's not scaling up. And it's not only about the garment workers, I think also the migrant workers. They also we also see the gender inequality in getting the access to technology when they send the remittance to Bangladesh or other countries. So I would like to know from the panel that what are your thoughts on reducing gender inequality in digital technology? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, over to this side. Yes.
Thank you so much for calling on me. My name is Viraj Kamath, and I represent Rare Gen Youth Network, an NGO focused on human rights advocacy for individuals with rare diseases. Migrant workers with rare diseases often face additional barriers when trying to access justice across borders, such as lack of specialized medical support, higher costs for legal aid, and difficulty in navigating complex legal systems. In light of this, how can digital technology, along with frameworks like UNGPs, be used to make justice more accessible for underrepresented groups, such as those with rare diseases? Specifically, how can we ensure that digital justice platforms and support services are inclusive to meet the needs of migrant workers with rare diseases? Thank you.
Oops. I think we'll take maybe two more questions. I know your hand was up, so one from you, and then one from, okay, I see three more. So one, and then Ellen, and then one at the very back.
Thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. My name is Prim Rajasarang Wakasamankan, and I'm representing children and youth. So children and youth has been affected by climate change, and then many young people are displaced, and then they become the migrants. In the aspect of digital technology and artificial intelligence, I would like to ask about the grievance mechanism. How do you maintain or make the grievance mechanism active, or in terms of active access to justice in terms of digital technology? Because I believe that we need to make our technology have to have continuous upgrade or continuous integration to make it fit for purpose at the same time, like in special situation like climate change or COVID-19 pandemic. And young people are often be unpaid or underpaid, especially for migrants, youth, and children. And how do we uphold their rights using digital technology to foster more inclusivity for children and youth rights? Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Ellen Sana from the Center for Migrant Advocacy and Migrant Forum in Asia. And thank you to our esteemed panelists. Of course, for the migrant workers, technology is the lifeline for many to stay connected with their families. Before the advent of digital technology, we have telephones, which is very expensive, of course, snail mail, which would take like months to be able to reach the other side. And then, of course, we definitely welcome digital technology because it makes things very fast, real time, not only in terms of staying connected with their families, but also in terms of reporting what is happening to them on site and wherever. But at the same time, we have to take caution of what Rebecca was saying, that of course it's a double-edged sword, that for the most part, we have to be careful that you do not use technology for surveillance purposes. But anyhow, what I've tried to also say is that for the longest time, we try to put the burden of addressing the many concerns of migrants on countries of origin. So destination will say, oh, but you have to prepare your workers, etc., etc. But I think with this technology thing, and for example, most of our Asian workers go to the Gulf states, and their stay there is dependent on the existence of their work visa. So once they lost their status, then they are expected to return to the country. So how do you expect that they would access whatever justice mechanism they have in those countries when for they do not know how long it will take for them to process their cases. So what happens is they go back home, nothing with nothing. Very good. Well, it's not because I'm from the Philippines, but of course, one of the measures we try to address this with is this joint and several liability, but only for those workers with recruitment agencies in the Philippines. But for those who do not have, which would be like 2/3 of the number of workers that we deploy, then there's nothing once they are back in the country. So the most that we can come up with is the subsistence allowance that is only good for 6 months, $100 per month. And usually they will not even use it for their own purpose in the destination country, but actually send it also as a form of remittance. So, but basically I'm saying is this should be good, that they do not have to stay there and become and stay in under the bridges just so they can process their cases. They can come back home and they can seek justice through online technology. But of course, I think at the end of the day, it's quite important that you do not leave it just to the migrants themselves, because what resources they would have. We attended to cases where we were called upon by partners in the destination country that there will be litigation, that we have to prepare the workers in the Philippines. So we have to make sure there is strong internet connectivity, that there is a quiet place, etc. And of course, Philippines is archipelago. So what I'm saying is the state at the end of the day should be able to invest on technology to make sure that it is accessible to all, and not only to those who have or who can afford to subscribe to Wi-Fi or internet, and also to make sure that it's not only controlled by the big seven companies of technology. At the end of the day, there is a lot of benefits to technology, but at the same time, we have to be conscious of the negative effects as well of relying so much on technology. And therefore, the state has to invest, the state has to make sure that there's strong regulation and that it is serving the common good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one last comment from the person in the back.
Thank you so much. I'm Thirat Rongruang from the Agriculture and Food Marketing Association for Asia and Pacific. We've been working with the millions of smallholder farmers and also migrant workers, and we are very impressed with the insightful presentation. I think we can look at the digital solution as one of the. We are digitally ready now. If you look at three countries who have the highest number of the digital transaction in the world, it's one in India, China, and Thailand. So we are ready. And also, the digital will be very highly traceable, transparent, and also scalable. But I think what I could recommend is that we need to have a paradigm shift, turning the problem to opportunity, because a lot of people still perceive human rights as the stick rather than the carrots. There are so many showcases in the country that the migrant worker earn double, triple time of the minimum wage. Then we have to also, when we trying to enforce the justice, we also need to present the awards to those who already comply. So by have this paradigm shift, then you get a lot of engagement from the policymaker and also from the business operator. And we are ready to work with you on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So perhaps I'll actually hand over to the panelists and to be able to address relevant questions for you. Who would like to start? Becca? Okay, perfect.
Okay, I'm going to just address a couple of questions and then leave the rest of the panelists for others. I put this publication out in the foyer. It's called Mobile Women and Mobile Phones, which addresses the gender question that was brought up in terms of unequal access to tech, and gives a mixed picture. Patriarchy playing into the mix. So, for instance, there's one quote from a Cambodian woman migrant worker who says, "Men are better than women in accessing information as they have the time to practice on the phone." But then there's a flip quote, also rooted into gender inequalities, saying women have to spend more time on tech searching for information than men because it's more dangerous for us to leave our home country. So we need to take extra care when we do. So anyway, there's quite a lot in here on how gender plays out in terms of access. And then I also wanted to address the issue of disability inclusiveness and go beyond inclusive or exclusive tech to note that the whole migration paradigm is exclusive and discriminatory toward persons with disabilities. And this is something that urgently and fundamentally, systematically needs addressing. Right now, the ILO in this region is doing some research with an organization of persons with disabilities that's forming an ASEAN-wide network, looking at what barriers are to access, including in medical testing that's required before a person leaves. Okay.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I would like to invite Celso for the next feedback.
Yeah. I concur with the comments of Miss Ellen Sana, and as to the putting too much responsibility on the deploying countries, putting too much responsibilities on deploying countries and protection of workers, but at the same time, we're not seeing eye to eye with the receiving country. I wouldn't agree in terms of bilateral agreements, labor cooperation. So sometimes this bilateral agreement would just be a piece of paper, as what we always admit to ourselves, that sometimes what is provided in these papers would be different in terms of implementation. Hence, on the Philippine experience, most of us would not access on the legal proceedings and legal processes on site, and would rather return to the Philippines and access what are the remedies provided to them because of the reluctance of some of the receiving countries to provide access to justice for our workers. Philippines had always been putting a lot of safeguards for our workers. Along with the creation of the department is a creation of a multi-million fund. We call it as action fund. We do have this action fund, which could be used for legal assistance, for financial assistance for our workers. And with this, we could use this to fund lawyers, to hire lawyers, interpreters, and paralegals to assist our workers on filing cases on site. But somehow, as what was mentioned by Ms. Ellen, some of the challenges is not on the part of the deploying state, but more of the challenges are on the part of the receiving state, particularly in where most of our workers are situated and where most of our domestic workers and those with vulnerable skill set are situated. So that's an existing problem for us. That's how on my part should bilateral agreements between parties must be strengthened. Those must be emphasized. Bilateral agreement should not just piece of paper. It should not only focus on recruitment. It should not only focus on the so-called recognition of the experience and education of the workers. It should focus first on how we will protect our workers, on how they could be given with, they could access legal processes, they could access fair and non-discrimination on the legal processes of the return of the receiving country. For me, there's no such thing as migrant rights. There's only human rights. Access to justice blurs human migrants' rights into human rights. It's just human rights. Whether you're a migrant to a country, you're a migrant worker, whether you are a citizen country, there should be same. There should be same treatment. There should be fair treatment. There should be same rights that should be accorded to them. And that's what we are always campaigning. And most on the part of the Philippines, the Philippine experience, what we are being entering into are just merely memorandum of understanding, MOUs, non-binding, non-legal binding. We cannot create legal obligation on the part of the receiving countries to protect our workers. Hence, what we are always campaigning is for us to move for stronger agreements, for stronger partnership. A bilateral agreement would be much sufficient rather than just an MOU for us. But most of the cases, our bilateral agreements with with other countries are just MOUs, non-binding, no legal responsibility in the department. That's one thing that I would like to note on the comments of Ms. Sana.
Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to invite Jibril for some reflection of all the questions.
The gentleman who spoke last from the floor mentioned the importance of using technology, and in this discussion, it's sort of in a positive sense, the carrot rather than the stick, as it were. And that links to the point that the best way to ensure access to justice is to prevent and deter injustice in the first place. By the time we're talking of wage theft, the problem has exploded by that time. So technology has a role in the earlier phases of this continuum that is in the prevention of injustice. As we've heard from the panel, and as every study have confirmed, the biggest by far area of dispute in labor concerns what? Money. The biggest area of civil dispute in the whole world concerns what? Money. So we are experienced with dealing with money dispute. There are other issues linked to migrant labor thing, but it is at the heart of it a money dispute. And as a world, we know how to deal with it. Now, if you want to look at the prevention part, yes, the biggest area that receives migrant labor is the Gulf countries. And I think I'm right to say all of them now legally have wage protection systems. The extent to which they work well is another question, but they have. Technology can be used to strengthen WPS's wage protection systems in preventing disputes around money and labor. So for advocates, for countries, sending countries and everyone, more effort in that bit on WPSs, on strengthening it, whereby they work as well as William would put it, that you already have that wage protection system with the multinational company you work for or the UN. And there's a large system. If the money is not there, it works. So we can work on that. But when the dispute happens and mediation have failed, everything have failed, and now we are in dispute, you owe me the money, you are refusing to accept liability, or you are refusing to pay me. I remind you, this bit about the labor migrants not being able to do what's needed, I disagree entirely. They are able to do what they should do. If you are a migrant in Malaysia or in Qatar and you've got a dispute, forget technology now. What you, as an ordinary person with a dispute, is you are saying, here's my complaint, you make it clearly, and you give evidence that your money has not been paid. Everything else is not your problem. That's why you have a helper, a lawyer who deals with that. Are we saying that the migrants who are in dispute are not able to use technology to make their statement that here's my complaint, here's my evidence that I have not been paid? I don't think anyone's saying that. And strictly speaking, that's the bit of it they have to do, and being available and confident to give evidence if they are needed. The rest of the work, it's on someone else. It's for advocacy groups, it's on countries, it's on network of lawyers. The hard work on this is on you. And an area to continue to work is to build around this wage theft, because it's the biggest area, and do everything that's needed. But I agree with the point that at the same time, do the more positive bit on, say, WPS, so that the receiving country government do not have the feeling that one is just coming with a stick to attack them, because there is some other effort being made and technology being at the center of it. And on paper, they also agree to all of these things. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm, very conscious of the time. So thank you all for also staying a bit longer for the session. And for the final reflection from William for the session.
Thanks, Yoko. Very quickly, my learning journey with WhatsApp. When I started with WhatsApp, I used to type the message, and then I had to read the whole thing again to find out if my English was correct and the spellings were right. But then I discovered autocorrect. And then I said, okay, this is better. And I could send out messages. But then the migrants taught me, illiterate migrants taught me voice message. And when they send voice message, illiterate migrants, when they have a complaint, they'll send voice message with photo evidence. And that's when I realized they know technology and they're tech savvy far more than me. So let's not pretend they don't know. They will produce evidence overnight. Second, I think we have to get off this attitude that we are guardians of the galaxy. We have to begin to learn to trust migrants. They will find a way. We've got to believe that they have solutions as well, and not treat them as some low-wage workers who don't have enough sense, leave their homes, look for a job overseas, and then get exploited and become vulnerable. We've got to believe in their capacity to fight. Third, we definitely want justice where they are working. But digital justice will allow them to fight till the last resort when they come home. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure Sir has not mentioned it, but we are still fighting for cases where the migrant has died and passed away. But we are still fighting for those claims, for the family that he or she has left behind. So I think it's time we did a paradigm shift. We started looking at the world from down, from a migrant's perspective, and believe that they have more solutions than all our research can produce. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William, for really reminding us the need for that paradigm shift, but also for all the panel members for having the thought-provoking and very rich conversation. I know we're already over time, so we just wanted to say thank you to the panelists, but also to the audience for joining us today, and wish you a very nice last day of the forum.